Her true story from Georgia. She said, "This isn't a charity." So I left quietly. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of the old Victorian house on Maple Street, casting gentle shadows across the hardwood floors that had been polished to a warm honey glow for over 60 years. I sat in my favorite corner of the kitchen, the one where the light hit just right at 7:30 each morning, cradling my coffee cup between weathered hands that had seen more seasons than I cared to count. The ceramic was warm against my palms, a small comfort in what had become an increasingly cold world. Outside, the Georgia humidity was already beginning to settle over the neighborhood like a familiar blanket. The magnolia tree in the front yard was in full bloom, its waxy white petals scattered across the wraparound porch where I used to sit with my Harold every evening, watching the fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. That seemed like a lifetime ago now, though it had only been 3 years since the good Lord called him home. The house felt different without Harold's presence. Too big, too quiet, too full of memories that whispered from every corner. That's how I found myself here, in my daughter-in-law Rebecca's home, living in what used to be the guest room that overlooked the backyard garden. When Rebecca had first suggested I move in after Harold's funeral, her words had been wrapped in warmth and concern. "Mama Rose," she had said, using the name she'd called me since she married my son Michael 22 years ago. "You shouldn't be alone in that big house. Come stay with us. We have plenty of room, and the grandchildren would love having their grandmother so close." At 74, I had thought it might be nice to have family around again, to hear children's laughter echoing through the hallways, to feel useful and needed. The decision to sell my childhood home hadn't been easy, but Rebecca's invitation felt like a blessing, a chance to spend my remaining years surrounded by the family Harold and I had worked so hard to build. That first morning in their home, I had woken before dawn, as was my habit, made my way to the kitchen, and prepared breakfast for everyone. The smell of bacon sizzling in the cast-iron skillet, the sound of biscuits rising in the oven, the ritual of setting the table with care. These small acts of service had always been my love language. When Rebecca came downstairs, already dressed for her job at the real estate office, she had smiled and squeezed my shoulder. "You don't have to do all this, Mama Rose," she had said. But there was gratitude in her voice, and I felt a warm glow of purpose. "Nonsense," I had replied, spooning scrambled eggs onto plates. "What's the point of having an old woman around if she can't make herself useful?" Those early days had been sweet days. I would wake each morning and prepare breakfast, pack lunches for my son Michael before he left for his job at the insurance company, and make sure 10-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Jake had everything they needed for school. After they left, I would tidy the house, start dinner preparations, and tend to the small herb garden I had planted by the kitchen window. Rebecca worked long hours, often not returning home until after 6 in the evening, and Michael's job required frequent travel. I filled the gaps naturally, picking up the children from school, helping with homework, listening to their stories about friends and teachers and playground dramas. Emma would curl up next to me on the sofa while I helped her with her reading, her small head resting against my arm. Jake would sit at the kitchen table, tongue poking out in concentration as he worked through math problems while I prepared vegetables for dinner. "Grandma Rose, you're the best cook in the whole world," Jake would say, and my heart would swell with the simple joy of being needed, of being appreciated. The weeks turned into months, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. It started with small things. Rebecca coming home stressed from work and barely acknowledging the dinner I had prepared, or Michael walking through the house with his phone pressed to his ear, giving me a distracted wave when I tried to tell him about his children's day. I told myself it was natural. They were busy people with demanding lives. The fact that I had taken over most of the household responsibilities was simply me doing my part, earning my keep in their home. When Rebecca mentioned offhandedly that grocery bills had increased since I moved in, I quietly began contributing from my monthly Social Security check. When the electric bill seemed higher than usual, I slipped cash into Rebecca's purse to help cover the difference. The first winter I spent in their home was particularly harsh, with ice storms that knocked out power for 3 days. I had prepared for such emergencies, as Harold had taught me, keeping candles and blankets ready, filling pots with water before the storm hit. When the power went out, I was the one who organized the family, setting up a safe place for everyone to sleep together in the living room, cooking simple meals on the gas stove, entertaining the children with stories and card games by candlelight. "I don't know what we would have done without you, Mama Rose," Michael had said that night, his arm around my shoulders as we sat by the fireplace. "You always know how to take care of everyone." Those words had meant everything to me. They reminded me of my purpose, of the value I brought to this family that had graciously opened their home to me. Spring arrived with a burst of dogwood blossoms and azaleas, and I threw myself into creating a proper vegetable garden in the backyard. My hands, though not as strong as they once were, still remembered the rhythm of planting, the gentle art of coaxing life from soil. I grew tomatoes and peppers, okra and collard greens, herbs that would flavor our meals throughout the summer. The children helped me, their small hands learning to distinguish between weeds and seedlings, their faces lighting up when they discovered the first cherry tomatoes turning red on the vine. But even as the garden flourished, I began to notice a coolness in the house that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Rebecca's smiles seemed more forced, her thank yous less frequent. When I would offer to help with household tasks, she would sometimes wave me away with a tired sigh. "I can handle it, Rose," she would say, using my name without the affectionate "Mama" she had always included before. "You don't need to hover." Hover. The word stung more than I let on. I wasn't hovering. I was helping, contributing, trying to justify my presence in their lives. But I began to pull back, to make myself smaller, to wait for invitation rather than offering assistance freely. The second year brought new challenges. Michael was promoted at work, which meant longer hours and more travel. Rebecca's mother fell ill, requiring frequent trips to Savannah to help with her care. The burden of managing the household fell increasingly on my shoulders, and I accepted it gladly. It felt good to be needed, to know that my presence made their lives easier. I took over the grocery shopping, meal planning, and most of the cleaning. I coordinated the children's schedules, drove them to soccer practice and piano lessons in Michael's old pickup truck, attended parent-teacher conferences when Rebecca and Michael couldn't make it. I helped Emma with her science fair project, a study of how different fertilizers affected plant growth, using vegetables from our garden as test subjects. I taught Jake to tie his shoes, using the method my own mother had taught me 70 years ago. The financial contributions increased gradually. When the washing machine broke down, I quietly paid for the repairs. When Emma needed a new winter coat, I bought it without mentioning it to her parents. When the family talked about wanting to take a vacation to Disney World but worrying about the cost, I anonymously left $500 in Rebecca's jewelry box with a note that said, "For the family trip, from someone who loves you." I never expected recognition for these contributions. The joy on the children's faces when they talked about their upcoming vacation was payment enough. The relief in Rebecca's voice when she discovered the money was worth every penny I had saved from my modest fixed income. But somewhere in the midst of all this giving, I began to feel myself disappearing. Conversations would stop when I entered a room, only to resume when I left. Family decisions were made without consulting me, even when they affected my daily routine. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of their lives, useful but not truly seen, needed but not valued. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late September. The air had finally begun to cool, carrying the first hints of autumn, and I was in the kitchen preparing one of Michael's favorite meals, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same recipe his father had loved, the one that had filled our own home with warmth and comfort for 35 years of marriage. I had spent the afternoon at the grocery store, carefully selecting the best cut of meat despite its higher price, splurging on fresh herbs and baby carrots because I wanted everything to be perfect. The roast had been cooking slowly for 4 hours, filling the house with rich, savory aromas that reminded me of Sunday dinners when Michael was young, when family meals were sacred time that brought us all together. Rebecca came home first, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors as she dropped her purse and keys on the kitchen counter. She looked tired, as she often did these days, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, her lipstick worn away from the day's meetings and phone calls. "Something smells wonderful," she said, but there was no warmth in her voice, no genuine appreciation. It was the kind of comment people make when they feel obligated to acknowledge effort, but don't really care about the result. Pot roast, I said, lifting the lid to check the vegetables. Michael's favorite. I thought we could have a nice family dinner tonight. Rebecca opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of wine, pouring herself a generous glass without offering me any. She leaned against the counter, watching me move around the kitchen with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Rose," she said finally, her voice carrying a weight that made me pause in my stirring. "We need to talk." My heart began to beat faster, though I couldn't say why. I had learned to read the subtle signs of displeasure in this household, the way conversations stopped when I approached, the way my suggestions were politely dismissed, the way my presence seemed to create an invisible tension that I couldn't understand. "Of course, dear," I said, setting down the wooden spoon and turning to face her. "What's on your mind?" She took a long sip of wine, her eyes avoiding mine. Outside, I could hear the children playing in the backyard, their laughter floating through the screen door like a reminder of innocence in a world that had grown increasingly complicated. "Michael and I have been talking," she began, her words careful and measured, "about the living arrangements, about how things have been going." I felt my stomach clench, but I kept my expression neutral. "I see. It's not that we don't appreciate everything you do," she continued, though her tone suggested otherwise. "The cooking, the cleaning, watching the kids, but—" She paused, taking another sip of wine, and in that silence, I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. I had lived long enough to recognize the prelude to rejection, the careful preparation of words designed to soften a blow that would hurt, regardless of how gently it was delivered. "But," I prompted, though part of me didn't want to hear what came next. "But this isn't working the way we thought it would," she said, her voice gaining strength as she found her rhythm. "You've taken over everything. The kitchen, the children's schedules, the household management. Michael and I feel like guests in our own home." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "I was just trying to help, to contribute, to earn my place here." "That's just it, Rose." She set down her wine glass with more force than necessary, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. "This isn't a charity." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and leaving me speechless. "This isn't a charity." As if my presence here was nothing more than an act of begrudging generosity. As if every meal I had prepared, every load of laundry I had folded, every homework session I had supervised, every dollar I had contributed from my meager savings was nothing more than me accepting handouts from reluctant benefactors. I stood there in the kitchen that had become my domain, surrounded by the evidence of my love and care. The pot roast simmering on the stove, the fresh flowers I had arranged that morning, the children's artwork I had carefully displayed on the refrigerator, the herb garden visible through the window that I had planted and tended with these old hands, and felt something inside me crack. "I see," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca seemed to realize the harshness of her words because she softened slightly. "What I mean is, we need to establish some boundaries, some clear expectations about roles and responsibilities. Maybe we should look into other options for you. Senior living communities, assisted living facilities, places where you can be around people your own age, where you can have your own space." But I was no longer listening to her attempts at diplomatic backtracking. The damage was done, the truth revealed. This isn't a charity. She saw my presence here not as a blessing, not as a gift of love and service, but as a burden, an obligation, a charitable act that had become inconvenient. I turned back to the stove, lifting the lid off the pot roast one more time. The meat was perfectly tender, falling apart at the touch of a fork. The vegetables were cooked to perfection, the gravy rich and flavorful. It was a meal prepared with love, with care, with the hope of bringing joy to people I had considered my family. "I understand," I said, my voice steady despite the tears that threatened to fall. "You're right, of course. This isn't a charity." Rebecca looked relieved, as if she had expected more resistance, more pleading, more dramatic protests. She didn't understand that I had lived through enough disappointments, enough heartbreaks, enough moments of devastating clarity to know that dignity was sometimes the only thing left to preserve. "We don't have to make any immediate changes," she said, her tone now conciliatory. We can take our time, look at options, find something that works for everyone. I nodded, turning off the burner under the pot roast. Would you mind serving dinner tonight? I'm feeling a bit tired. Of course, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. You go rest. I'll take care of everything. I walked slowly out of the kitchen, past the dining room where I had set the table with the good china Harold and I had received as a wedding gift 52 years ago, past the living room where I had spent countless evenings helping with homework and reading bedtime stories, past the family photos that chronicled years of birthdays and holidays and milestones that I had helped create and celebrate. In my room, the guest room that had never quite become mine despite 2 years of occupancy, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the tears fall. They came quietly, as tears do when you're too tired for dramatic sobbing, too hurt for anger, too old for the luxury of righteous indignation. This isn't a charity. The words echoed in my mind as I sat there in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of family life continuing downstairs without me. I could hear Michael's voice as he came home from work, could hear the children's excited chatter as they told him about their day, could hear the clatter of dishes as Rebecca served the dinner I had prepared. I thought about all the ways I had tried to earn my place in this home, the financial contributions that had stretched my fixed income to its limits, the endless hours of cooking and cleaning and childcare, the quiet sacrifices I had made, like giving up my morning walks because Rebecca needed me to watch the children, or canceling my weekly bridge game with the ladies from church because the family needed me to run errands. I had believed that love was demonstrated through service, that my worth was measured by my usefulness. I had poured myself into their lives like water into a pitcher, giving until I felt empty, hoping that my contributions would make me indispensable, would secure my place in their hearts and their home. But I had been wrong. I hadn't been building a life with them. I had been auditioning for a role that was never really mine to play. The realization was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant acknowledging that the family I had loved and served didn't truly want me there. Liberating because it freed me from the exhausting effort of trying to earn something that should have been freely given. I sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the house settle around me, feeling the weight of my 74 years and the accumulated wisdom of a life fully lived. I thought about Harold, about the way he had loved me, not for what I could do for him, but for who I was. I thought about our early years of marriage, when we had struggled financially, but had been rich in love and respect for each other. "Rose, my beautiful Rose," he used to say, "you are not what you do. You are who you are, and who you are is enough." I had forgotten that lesson in the years since his death, had allowed grief and loneliness to convince me that I needed to earn love through service, that my value lay in my usefulness rather than in my inherent worth as a human being. But I remembered now, sitting in that dark room, listening to the laughter of a family that had never truly been mine. I remembered who I was before I became a mother, before I became a wife, before I became a caregiver and a homemaker, and a woman who measured her worth by how well she could serve others. I was Rose Margaret Patterson, born in a small town in South Georgia to parents who had loved me fiercely despite having little money to show for it. I was the girl who had learned to read by the light of kerosene lamps, who had worked her way through secretarial school, who had met Harold at a church social and known instantly that he was the man she would marry. I was the woman who had buried 2 babies in infancy and had loved the one who survived with an intensity that had sometimes frightened me. I was the wife who had stood by her husband through job losses and health scares and the ordinary struggles of building a life together. I was not a charity case. I was not a burden. I was a woman with my own history, my own strength, my own dignity. The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. I would leave quietly, with grace, without drama or recriminations. I would not beg for acceptance or try to negotiate my way back into their good graces. I would simply go, taking with me the knowledge that I had loved them well, even if that love had not been reciprocated in the way I had hoped. That night, I wrote 3 letters. The first was to Michael, telling him how proud I was of the man he had become, how grateful I was for the years we had shared, how much I had enjoyed being his mother. I wrote about his childhood, about the way he had loved catching fireflies in mason jars, about the pride I had felt when he graduated from college, about the joy of watching him become a father himself. The second letter was to Emma and Jake, my beloved grandchildren. I told them about the garden, about how to tell when tomatoes are ripe, about the secret to making biscuits light and fluffy. I told them stories about their grandfather, about the way he had loved them, even though he had never had the chance to meet them. I told them to be kind to each other, to remember that family is a gift that should never be taken for granted. The third letter was to Rebecca. It was the hardest one to write because I had to find a way to express forgiveness without bitterness, understanding without resentment. I thanked her for opening her home to me, for including me in her family's life, for showing me that it was time to reclaim my independence. I told her that I harbored no ill will, that I understood the pressures she faced as a working mother, that I hoped she would find peace and happiness. I spent the next 3 days quietly packing my belongings. I had accumulated very little during my time in their home, having sold most of my possessions when I left my own house. My clothes fit into 2 suitcases, my books into a single box, my photographs and mementos into another small container. The herb garden would have to stay, of course, but I took seeds from the plants I had grown, carefully storing them in small envelopes labeled with planting instructions. On Thursday morning, while the family was at work and school, I called a taxi and loaded my few possessions into the trunk. I left the letters on the kitchen counter along with my house key and a final meal, a casserole that could be heated for dinner, with instructions written in my careful script. I took one last walk through the house, remembering the good times, the moments of genuine connection, the laughter that had filled these rooms. I said goodbye to the herb garden, to the kitchen where I had cooked hundreds of meals, to the living room where I had read countless bedtime stories. Then I closed the door behind me and never looked back. The taxi driver was a kind man named Eugene, who had lived in Georgia all his life. When I asked him to take me to the bus station, he looked at me with concern. "You sure about this, ma'am? You got family to meet you wherever you're going?" I smiled at him, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I'm going home," I told him, "to the place where I belong." The bus ride to Valdosta took 3 hours, long enough for me to watch the familiar Georgia landscape roll past the windows, long enough to think about the future I was creating for myself. I had enough money saved to rent a small apartment, enough Social Security income to live modestly but comfortably. I had my health, my dignity, and the hard-won knowledge that I didn't need anyone else's approval to validate my worth. The apartment I found was perfect for my needs, a 1-bedroom unit in a quiet complex populated mostly by other seniors. It had a small kitchen with a window over the sink, a living room with enough space for my favorite chair and a television, and a tiny balcony where I could grow herbs in containers. My new neighbors were friendly without being intrusive. There was Martha, a retired teacher who had lived in the same apartment for 10 years, and Frank, a widower who grew the most beautiful roses I had ever seen. There was Betty, who organized weekly card games, and James, who had fought in Vietnam and still wore his service cap when he walked to the mailbox each morning. We were all people who had lived full lives, who had raised families and pursued careers and experienced the joys and sorrows that come with decades of living. We treated each other with the respect and kindness that come naturally to people who understand that every day is a gift, that every friendship is precious, that every moment of peace is to be treasured. I established new routines that revolved around my own needs and desires rather than the demands of others. I woke each morning when my body was ready, not when alarms demanded it. I prepared simple meals that pleased my palate, not elaborate dishes designed to impress or appease. I read books that interested me, watched television programs I enjoyed, took walks when the weather was nice. I joined the local library's book club, where I met other women who shared my love of reading and my appreciation for thoughtful discussion. I volunteered at the community center, helping with their weekly senior meals program, finding joy in serving people who genuinely appreciated my efforts. I planted a container garden on my balcony, growing tomatoes and peppers and herbs that reminded me of the larger garden I had left behind. The act of nurturing plants, of coaxing life from soil and seeds, remained deeply satisfying, but now I did it for my own pleasure rather than as a demonstration of my worth. 3 months after I left, I received a phone call from Michael. His voice was tight with worry and what might have been guilt. "Mom, where are you? We came home and found your letters. We've been trying to find you for weeks." I was sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, a cup of tea cooling in my hands. The sound of his voice brought back memories of the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings, who had trusted me to make everything better. "I'm safe," I told him. "I'm well. I'm home." "But where is home?" he asked. "The address you left isn't valid. The phone number doesn't work." I had given them a post office box address and a prepaid cell phone number, wanting to maintain some connection while protecting my privacy. I wasn't ready for visitors, wasn't ready for the complicated emotions that face-to-face contact would bring. "I'm living independently now," I said. "I'm happy, Michael, happier than I've been in a long time. But Mom, you don't have to live alone. We want you to come back. Rebecca says she's sorry about what she said. She didn't mean it the way it sounded." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar tug of love and duty, the old desire to smooth over conflicts and make everyone comfortable. But I also felt the strength I had built over these months of solitude, the confidence that had grown from proving to myself that I could create a life worth living. "I know she's sorry," I said, "and I forgive her. But I can't come back, honey. I need to be where I'm wanted for who I am, not what I can do." "But we do want you," he said, and I could hear tears in his voice. "The kids ask about you every day. Emma keeps checking your herb garden, hoping you'll come back to tend it." The mention of my grandchildren brought tears to my own eyes, but I held firm. "I love them, and I love you. But love isn't enough if it's not paired with respect. Your wife was right. Your home isn't a charity. And I'm not a charity case." We talked for another few minutes, with me assuring him that I was safe and well cared for, and him promising to stay in touch. I could hear the confusion in his voice, his inability to understand why I wouldn't accept their apology and return to the life I had left behind. But some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. Some words once spoken cannot be taken back. Some relationships once damaged cannot be restored to their original state. That didn't mean I was bitter or unforgiving. It simply meant I had learned to value my own peace of mind over the comfort of others, to choose dignity over desperation, to understand that love without respect is not really love at all. I continued to send birthday cards to the children, to call on holidays, to maintain the connection without allowing myself to be pulled back into the old patterns. I learned that it was possible to love someone from a distance, to care about their well-being without sacrificing my own. 6 months into my new life, I met a man named Robert at the library book club. He was 78 years old, a retired carpenter whose wife had died 5 years earlier. He had kind eyes and gentle hands, and he treated me with the sort of old-fashioned courtesy that had gone out of style decades ago. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" he asked, after we had been chatting about books and gardening for several weeks. "There's a nice little restaurant downtown that serves the best fried chicken in 3 counties." I was surprised by how much I wanted to say yes, how ready I was to open my heart to the possibility of companionship, maybe even love. I had thought that part of my life was over, that at 74 I was too old for romance, too set in my ways for new relationships. But Robert made me remember that every stage of life has its own gifts, its own possibilities, its own potential for joy. We began spending time together, taking walks in the park, sharing meals, talking about our children and grandchildren and the long roads that had brought us to this unexpected place. He never made me feel like I needed to earn his affection through service. He appreciated the meals I cooked for him, but he also cooked for me, grilling steaks on his small patio, making coffee in the morning when I stayed over. He valued my opinions, asked for my advice, treated me like a partner rather than a caregiver. "You're a remarkable woman, Rose," he told me one evening, as we sat on his porch watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Strong and kind and wise. Any family would be lucky to have you." "I had a family," I said quietly. "But I wasn't what they needed." "Then they were fools," he said, with the fierce loyalty of someone who had come to know and care for me. "And their loss is my gain." 1 year after I left Michael and Rebecca's house, I received a surprise visitor. I was in my kitchen preparing lunch when I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Emma standing in the hallway, looking nervous but determined. She was taller than I remembered, her hair longer, her face more mature. She was no longer the 10-year-old who had curled up next to me on the sofa for reading time. She was becoming a young woman, growing into her own sense of self and purpose. "Grandma Rose," she said, and then she was in my arms, hugging me with the fierce intensity that only children can manage. "Emma, sweetheart," I said, holding her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the solid warmth of her growing body. "How did you find me?" "I hired a private investigator," she said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had clearly put significant thought into this plan. "Well, I paid him with my birthday money and allowance savings. It took me 6 months to save up enough." I laughed despite myself, amazed by her determination and resourcefulness. "You hired a private investigator?" "I had to find you," she said, looking up at me with eyes that were wise beyond her years. "I had to tell you that I'm sorry, that I miss you, that the garden hasn't been the same without you." We sat on my small sofa, and she told me about the past year, about how quiet the house had been without me, how different meals tasted when they came from restaurants or frozen packages, how much she missed our homework sessions and bedtime stories. "Mom and Dad fight more now," she said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Dad says Mom shouldn't have said what she said. Mom says you overreacted, but I think you were right to leave." "Oh, sweetheart," I said, stroking her hair. "It's not your place to take sides. Your parents love you, and they're doing the best they can." "But they hurt you," she said fiercely, "and that's not okay." I looked at this remarkable child, this young woman who had spent her own money and undertaken her own investigation to find me, who had somehow made her way to my apartment to offer her own apology for wrongs she hadn't committed. I saw strength in her that reminded me of myself at her age, a determination to right injustices, even when it wasn't her responsibility to do so. "You're right," I said finally. "They did hurt me, and it wasn't okay. But sometimes adults make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes have consequences they didn't expect. The important thing is that I'm okay now. I'm happy, and I'm safe, and I'm living the life I choose to live." We spent the afternoon together, catching up on the year we had missed, sharing stories and laughter. I showed her my container garden, taught her how to tell when the tomatoes were ripe, gave her seeds to take home and plant in her own pots. "Will you come back?" she asked as she prepared to leave. "For Christmas maybe, or my birthday." I thought about it carefully, weighing my desire to see her against the complications that such a visit would bring. "I don't think so, sweetheart. Not yet, but you can visit me anytime you want. When you're old enough to travel on your own, you'll always have a place here." She hugged me again, fiercely, and I felt the bittersweet mixture of love and loss that comes with caring deeply for someone you cannot hold on to. 2 years have passed since that visit, and I have built a life that satisfies me in ways I never expected. Robert and I have grown closer, spending most evenings together, sharing meals and conversations, and the comfortable silence that comes with deep companionship. We've talked about marriage, but neither of us feels the need to formalize what we have. At our age, love is less about legal documents and more about daily choices, about showing up for each other in the small ways that matter. I've made friends with my neighbors, joined a gardening club, volunteered at the local food bank. I've discovered that I have talents and interests that extend beyond cooking and cleaning and childcare. I've taken up watercolor painting, learning to capture the beauty of Georgia sunsets and spring flowers. I've joined a writing group where I've been encouraged to tell my own story, to find my voice after years of silence. The children call me occasionally, and I treasure those conversations. Jake is now 10, playing Little League baseball and learning to play guitar. Emma is 13, navigating the complicated world of middle school with the same determination she showed when she hired that private investigator to find me. She sends me photos of the plants she's growing from the seeds I gave her, proud of her success in coaxing life from soil. Michael calls on holidays, and we maintain a cordial but distant relationship. He's never understood why I left. why I couldn't simply accept their apology and return to the life I had been living. He sees my departure as stubborn pride rather than necessary self-preservation. And perhaps he's not entirely wrong. Pride can be a luxury in family relationships, but it can also be a lifeline when love comes with conditions that compromise your sense of self. Rebecca and I haven't spoken since the day I left. I bear her no ill will, but I also have no desire to revisit the pain of that relationship. She was facing her own pressures, her own challenges, and I was an easy target for frustrations that had nothing to do with me. I understand that now, and I forgive her for it. But forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and understanding doesn't require returning to harmful situations. I think often about the woman I was when I first moved into their home, so eager to please, so desperate to earn love through service. I was grieving Harold's death, terrified of being alone, willing to sacrifice my own needs and dignity for the security of belonging somewhere. I measured my worth by how useful I could be, how much I could give, how little I could ask for in return. That woman was not weak or foolish. She was wounded and lonely and doing the best she could with the tools she had. But she was also accepting a kind of love that wasn't really love at all. It was conditional acceptance based on performance, gratitude mixed with obligation, tolerance disguised as affection. Real love doesn't require you to earn it every day. Real love doesn't keep a running tally of what you've contributed versus what you've received. Real love doesn't make you feel like you're auditioning for a role that could be revoked at any moment. I learned this from Robert, who loves me not because I cook his favorite meals or keep his house tidy, but because he enjoys my company, values my opinions, and finds joy in sharing his life with mine. I learned it from Martha next door, who brings me soup when I'm feeling under the weather, not because she owes me anything, but because that's what neighbors do for each other. I learned it from the women in my book club, who include me in their discussions and their friendship simply because they like who I am. Most importantly, I learned to love myself in the same way, unconditionally, without requiring myself to prove my worth through endless service to others. The apartment where I live now is small, but it's mine. Every piece of furniture was chosen because I liked it, not because it matched someone else's decorating scheme. Every meal I cook is prepared because I want to eat it, not because I need to demonstrate my culinary skills. Every decision I make is based on what's best for me, not on what will make me more acceptable to others. Some people might call this selfish, but I've learned that there's a difference between being selfish and practicing self-care. Selfish is taking without giving, demanding without contributing, expecting others to sacrifice for your comfort. Self-care is recognizing your own needs and meeting them, setting boundaries that protect your well-being, refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your dignity. I wake up each morning in my own bed, in my own space, surrounded by my own things. I make coffee in my favorite mug, sit on my balcony watching the sunrise paint the sky in watercolors, and feel grateful for the peace that surrounds me. There's no tension in the air, no walking on eggshells, no careful monitoring of moods and reactions to determine how I should behave. The silence in my apartment is different from the silence I felt in that house on Maple Street. That silence was heavy with unspoken resentments, thick with the weight of words that couldn't be said, oppressive with the sense that I was taking up space that would be better occupied by someone else. This silence is golden, filled with possibility, rich with the knowledge that I belong here simply because I chose to be here. My herb garden has flourished beyond my wildest expectations. The basil grows tall and fragrant. The rosemary spreads across its container like a green carpet. The thyme releases its earthy scent every time I brush against it. When I cook now, I step onto my balcony and gather what I need, feeling the same satisfaction I felt in that larger garden, but without the underlying anxiety about whether my efforts were appreciated. I've learned to cook for one again, a skill I thought I'd lost after 50 years of cooking for Harold and then for Michael's family. I make small portions of the dishes I love, experiment with new recipes that catch my eye, indulge in desserts that are just for me. There's something deeply satisfying about preparing a meal that exists solely for my own pleasure, about sitting down at my small table with a book and a plate of food I've prepared exactly the way I like it. The loneliness I feared when I left hasn't materialized in the way I expected. Yes, there are moments when I miss the constant activity of a household full of people, when I wish I could hear Emma's laughter or Jake's excited chatter about his latest adventure. But loneliness and solitude are different things, and I've learned to appreciate the distinction. Loneliness is feeling disconnected from others even when you're surrounded by people. It's the isolation that comes from being seen but not understood, from being needed but not valued, from being present but not truly included. Solitude is choosing to be alone because you enjoy your own company, because you've created a life that satisfies you, because you've learned that being alone doesn't mean being lonely. I have plenty of human connection in my life now. It's just connection that enhances rather than diminishes me. My friendship with Robert has deepened into something I never expected to find at this stage of life. We've talked about our past marriages, our children, our regrets and disappointments and dreams. We've shared stories about Harold and his late wife, Margaret, honoring those relationships while acknowledging that our hearts are big enough to hold both grief for what we've lost and joy for what we've found. "You know what I love about you, Rose?" he said to me just last week, as we sat on his porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "You're not trying to be anyone but yourself. You're not performing for me or trying to earn my affection. You're just you, and you're wonderful." Those words meant more to me than any compliment I'd ever received about my cooking or cleaning or caretaking abilities. They told me that I was valued for my essence, not my actions, for who I was rather than what I could do. I've started writing letters to other women who might be facing similar situations. The writing group I joined has encouraged me to share my story, and I've been amazed by how many women have responded with their own tales of feeling invisible, unappreciated, taken for granted by the families they've devoted their lives to serving. There's Eleanor, whose son's wife made it clear that she was welcome to visit, but not to stay. There's Patricia, who realized that her daughter called her only when she needed a babysitter or a loan. There's Margaret, who discovered that her contribution to the household was measured solely in terms of the chores she could complete and the problems she could solve. All of these women had internalized the message that their worth was tied to their usefulness, that love was something to be earned through service, rather than something to be given freely. All of them had reached a breaking point where they had to choose between their dignity and their desire to belong. In my letters to them, I try to share what I've learned, that it's never too late to reclaim your life, that you don't have to accept crumbs when you deserve the whole loaf, that love without respect is not love at all. I tell them about the peace I found in solitude, about the joy of making decisions based on my own needs and desires, about the relief of no longer having to prove my worth every single day. Some of them write back to tell me they've made changes in their own lives. They've moved out of uncomfortable living situations, set boundaries with adult children who took them for granted, started pursuing interests and friendships that had been neglected for years. Others tell me they're still gathering the courage to make a change, still trying to find the strength to choose themselves over the familiar discomfort of being undervalued. I understand their hesitation. It takes tremendous courage to walk away from family, even when that family doesn't treat you well. It takes faith to believe that you can build a better life for yourself, that you deserve better than what you're currently receiving. It takes strength to face the unknown rather than accepting the known disappointment. But I also know that the alternative, staying in situations that diminish your spirit, accepting treatment that erodes your self-worth, continuing to give your all to people who see your contributions as obligations rather than gifts, is a kind of death in life. It's the slow dissolution of everything that makes you who you are, the gradual disappearance of your own needs and desires until you become nothing more than a service provider in human form. 3 years have passed since I walked out of that house on Maple Street, and I can honestly say that I've never regretted my decision. Yes, I miss my grandchildren. Yes, I grieve the loss of the family relationships I had hoped to maintain. Yes, there are moments when I wonder if I was too hasty, too proud, too unwilling to compromise. But then I remember how it felt to live in that house, to walk on eggshells, to measure every word and action against the possibility of disapproval. I remember the weight of trying to earn something that should have been freely given, the exhaustion of pouring myself out in service to people who saw that service as their due rather than as a gift. I remember the moment Rebecca said, "This isn't a charity," and I feel again the crushing realization that I had been seen as a burden rather than a blessing, as a recipient of reluctant generosity rather than a contributor to the family's well-being. Most importantly, I remember the woman I was becoming in that environment, smaller, quieter, more apologetic, more desperate to please. I was disappearing into the role of grateful dependent, losing sight of the strong, capable, independent woman I had been for most of my life. The woman I am now is someone I recognize and respect. She sets boundaries without guilt, expresses her needs without apology, makes choices based on her own values rather than others' expectations. She has learned that love is not something to be earned through perfect behavior, but something to be shared between people who value and respect each other. She has also learned that family is not just about blood relations, but about the people who choose to see and appreciate you for who you are. My chosen family now includes Robert, with his gentle humor and steadfast loyalty. It includes Martha, who brings me tomatoes from her garden and listens to my stories without judgment. It includes the women in my book club, who challenge my thinking and expand my horizons. It includes Betty, who taught me to play canasta, and Frank, who shares roses from his garden and memories of his late wife. These people don't love me because I'm useful to them. They love me because they enjoy my company, value my friendship, and find their own lives enriched by knowing me. This is what healthy relationships look like, and it's what I wish I had understood decades ago. If I could go back and give advice to my younger self, I would tell her that love is not earned through service, that worth is not measured by usefulness, that dignity is not a luxury but a necessity. I would tell her that it's better to be alone and respected than to be surrounded by people who take you for granted. I would tell her that growing older doesn't mean becoming less valuable, that having needs doesn't make you selfish, that asking for respect is not too much to expect from the people who claim to love you. Most of all, I would tell her that it's never too late to choose yourself, to walk away from situations that diminish you, to build a life that reflects your values and meets your needs. But I can't go back, and perhaps that's for the best. The lessons I've learned had to be learned the hard way, through pain and disappointment and the kind of soul-searching that only comes when you're forced to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself and your relationships. The woman I am today is stronger because of what I've been through, wiser because of the mistakes I've made, more compassionate because I understand how easy it is to lose yourself in the desire to be loved and needed. As I sit here on my balcony, watching the sun set over the Georgia landscape I've loved all my life, I feel a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that brought me to this place. The path wasn't easy, and the destination wasn't what I had originally planned, but it's exactly where I needed to be. I am 77 years old now, and I am finally, truly, completely myself. I am not performing for anyone, not auditioning for approval, not measuring my worth by how much I can give or how little I can ask for in return. I am simply Rose Margaret Patterson, a woman who has lived a full life, made her share of mistakes, learned from her experiences, and finally discovered that the most important love of all is the love she has for herself. And if that sounds selfish to some people, well, that's their problem, not mine. I've learned that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's essential. It's the foundation upon which all other healthy relationships are built. To any woman reading this who finds herself in a similar situation, who feels invisible and unappreciated despite giving her all, who wonders if she's asking for too much when she simply wants to be valued for who she is rather than what she can do, I want you to know this. You are not too much. You are not asking for too much. You deserve love that doesn't require you to earn it every day through perfect performance. You deserve respect that doesn't have to be negotiated or bargained for. You deserve to be seen and appreciated for who you are, not just what you can do for others. You have the right to take up space, to have needs, to express opinions, to make choices based on your own well-being. You have the right to walk away from situations that diminish you, even if those situations involve people you love. Most importantly, you have the right to choose yourself, to prioritize your own peace and dignity, to build a life that satisfies you rather than one that simply satisfies others. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to reclaim your power. It's never too late to remember who you were before you became so focused on who everyone else needed you to be. The world needs women who know their worth, who refuse to settle for less than they deserve, who model self-respect and dignity for the younger generations watching them. Be that woman. Choose yourself. Walk away from anyone who treats you like a charity case rather than the gift you are. You deserve so much more than crumbs. You deserve the whole feast. And when you finally give it to yourself, you'll wonder why you waited so long.